The morning I found the folder, hidden beneath the loose floorboard in his study, the coffee in my hand had already gone cold. I remember the way my fingers trembled as I pulled out document after document, each one revealing a truth I had refused to see for 3 long years. His name was not Vincent Powell. The woman I had embraced as my mother-in-law at our wedding was not his mother. The man who had given me away spiritually at that altar was not his father. Every single moment I had believed was love, every whispered promise in the darkness of our bedroom, every gentle kiss on my forehead before he left for what I thought was his accounting firm downtown. All of it was nothing but a carefully constructed lie, designed to drain me of everything I had worked my entire life to build. He had said to me the night before, holding my face in his hands with those eyes that I had trusted completely, "Marlene, you are the only woman I have ever truly loved, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." 24 hours later, I would discover that those words were just as false as the wedding certificate that hung in our living room. Before we begin, sweetheart, if this story touches you even a little, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where my family is tuning in from. My name is Marlene Thompson, and I am 62 years old now, sitting in the small cottage I bought after everything fell apart, with nothing but the sound of birds outside my window and the wisdom that only heartbreak can teach. But let me take you back to the beginning, because every story of betrayal starts somewhere much simpler, somewhere that seems completely ordinary until you look back with eyes that have finally learned to see. I grew up in a modest home in Birmingham, Alabama, the youngest of 4 children born to a factory worker father and a mother who cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. My parents never had much in terms of material possessions, but they gave us something far more valuable than money could ever buy. They gave us discipline, faith, and the unshakable belief that hard work could transform any life, no matter how humble its beginnings. I watched my mother come home with her hands raw from scrubbing other people's floors, and I made a promise to myself that I would build something different. Not because I was ashamed of where I came from, never that, but because I wanted to honor their sacrifices by becoming more than our circumstances had allowed them to be. I put myself through college working 2 jobs, one at a diner during the day and another at a laundromat folding clothes until midnight. There were nights when I fell asleep with textbooks on my chest, too exhausted to make it to my bed. But I never stopped pushing forward. By the time I was 35, I had built a small accounting firm that served businesses throughout the state. And by 50, that firm had grown into something I never could have imagined. Thompson Financial Services employed over 200 people and had contracts with some of the largest corporations in the Southeast. I will not pretend that money did not change certain things in my life, because it did. I noticed how people who had never looked my way suddenly wanted to be my friend, how distant relatives I had not heard from in decades suddenly remembered my phone number, how opportunities that had been closed to me for years suddenly opened wide. But I also remembered where I came from, and I tried to carry that humility with me, even as my bank account grew larger. My first husband, a good man named Theodore, passed away from cancer when I was 48 years old. We had been married for 22 years, and his death left a hole in my heart that I was certain could never be filled. Theodore was a high school teacher who never cared about the money I made, who fell in love with me when I was still a struggling college student with holes in my shoes and dreams bigger than my wallet. He used to say to me, holding my hand across our small kitchen table, "Marlene, I did not marry your future success. I married your beautiful spirit, and that is worth more than any fortune. When he died, I thought that chapter of my life, the chapter of romantic love and partnership, was closed forever. I was content with that. Truly, I was. I had my business, my charity work, my small circle of genuine friends, and the memory of a marriage that had been built on real love. I was not looking for anything else when Vincent Powell walked into my life. It happened at a charity gala I was hosting, a fundraiser for scholarships that helped first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. The ballroom of the Grandview Hotel was decorated with gold and white linens, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables filled with Birmingham's most generous donors. I was standing near the silent auction items, checking to make sure everything was properly displayed, when I felt someone's presence beside me. "Excuse me," a deep, smooth voice said, "but are you the Marlene Thompson I have been reading about in the newspaper?" I turned to find a man who appeared to be his early 50s, tall, with graying temples that gave him a distinguished appearance, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that spoke of taste rather than flashiness. His smile was warm but not aggressive, his posture confident but not arrogant, and his eyes, those deep brown eyes that I would later learn were his greatest weapon, held what seemed like genuine kindness. "I suppose that depends on what the newspaper said about me," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. He laughed, a rich sound that seemed completely natural, and extended his hand. "Only wonderful things, I assure you. My name is Vincent Powell. I recently relocated to Birmingham from Philadelphia, and I have been trying to find charitable organizations that truly make a difference, not just the ones that host fancy parties and accomplish very little." I liked him immediately, and looking back, I can see that this was exactly what he had intended. Vincent was a master at reading people, at understanding what they valued and then presenting himself as the perfect embodiment of those values. I valued authenticity, so he appeared authentic. I valued humility, so he downplayed his supposed wealth and spoke instead of wanting to give back. I valued substance over style, so he talked about education and opportunity rather than possessions and status. Every single thing about him was calculated to appeal to exactly who I was, and I fell for it completely. Over the following weeks, Vincent became a regular presence at various charitable events I attended. He would appear at scholarship ceremonies, at hospital fundraisers, at community development meetings, always with that warm smile and those sincere-seeming questions about my work. We began having coffee after meetings, then lunch, then dinner. He told me about his supposed childhood in a middle-class neighborhood in Philadelphia, about his parents who had worked hard to give him opportunities, about his career in financial consulting that had taken him all over the country. "I have made good money," he said one evening over dinner at a quiet restaurant, "but I never had a family of my own. My work always seemed to get in the way, and I told myself that success was enough. But now, at this stage of my life, I realize that accomplishment means very little if you have no one to share it with." Those words pierced something in my heart that I had thought was healed over. "I understand that feeling," I admitted. "After Theodore passed, I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing the emptiness." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine, his touch gentle and respectful. "The right person does not fill the emptiness," he said softly. "They help you transform it into something new." Looking back, I can see how perfectly crafted that line was, how it acknowledged my grief for Theodore while positioning himself as the answer to my loneliness. At the time, I thought it was the most profound thing anyone had ever said to me. Our relationship moved slowly at first, which I took as a sign of his respect. Vincent never pushed for physical intimacy, never seemed particularly interested in the details of my finances, never asked about my properties or investments. In fact, he seemed almost uncomfortable when money was discussed, steering conversations away from material things and toward values and experiences. "I have enough for my needs," he would say with a shrug. "What I do not have is someone who understands that life is about more than the accumulation of wealth." I believed him, every single word. Why would I not? He paid for our dinners, insisted on buying me small but thoughtful gifts, drove what appeared to be a sensible but respectable car. Nothing about him suggested a man who was after money. That was, of course, the brilliance of his approach. A man who showed up in a flashy car and expensive jewelry, who asked probing questions about my assets, who seemed overly interested in my business dealings. That man would have triggered every warning signal I had. But Vincent was none of those things. Vincent was humble. Vincent was patient. Vincent was perfect. 3 months into our relationship, he told me he wanted me to meet his parents. "They are coming to visit from Philadelphia," he explained, with what seemed like genuine nervousness. "They are older now, and traveling is not easy for them. But when I told them about you, my mother insisted on meeting the woman who has captured my heart." I was moved by this, by the idea that he had told his parents about me, that he was serious enough about our relationship to involve his family. "I would be honored to meet them," I said, and I meant it. The meeting was arranged at a nice restaurant, not too formal but respectable, the kind of place where families gathered for important occasions. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing an outfit that was elegant but not showy, wanting to make a good impression on the people who had raised the man I was falling in love with. When I arrived, Vincent was already there with an older couple seated at a corner table. The woman I would come to know as Barbara was small and round, with silver hair pinned back in a neat bun and glasses that magnified her warm brown eyes. The man called Gerald was tall like Vincent, with the same distinguished gray at his temples and a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. "Oh, Marlene," Barbara said, rising to embrace me with surprising warmth. "Vincent has told us so much about you. I feel like I already know you." I hugged her back, feeling tears prick at my eyes, because I had not experienced this kind of maternal warmth since my own mother had passed away 7 years earlier. Gerald shook my hand firmly but gently. "It is a pleasure to meet you. Our son speaks of you constantly, and now I can see why." That dinner was one of the happiest evenings of my life. Barbara talked about raising Vincent, about his childhood mishaps and triumphs, about how proud they were of everything he had accomplished. She showed me photographs on her phone, pictures of a young Vincent at graduations and family gatherings, images that seemed to confirm every story he had ever told me. Gerald spoke about the values they had tried to instill in their son, about the importance of honesty and hard work and treating others with respect. "The most important thing we taught him," Gerald said, looking at Vincent with what appeared to be fatherly pride, "is that a man is only as good as his word. Money comes and goes, but integrity is forever." I nodded, believing every syllable, not knowing that the man speaking these words about integrity was himself a liar, performing in a carefully rehearsed play. Looking back now, I can identify the small details that should have seemed strange. The photographs Barbara showed me were all of Vincent alone or with crowds, never intimate family pictures that might have shown other relatives who could contradict their stories. Gerald sometimes hesitated before answering questions about their supposed life in Philadelphia, as if consulting an internal script before responding. Barbara occasionally called Vincent by the wrong name, quickly correcting herself with a laugh and a claim that she was getting old and forgetful. I explained away every one of these inconsistencies because I wanted so desperately to believe in the beautiful story they were selling me. That is perhaps the hardest truth of all, that we often participate in our own deception because the alternative is too painful to accept. Vincent proposed to me 6 months after we first met, on a quiet evening at my home, rather than in some grand public gesture. We had just finished dinner, a meal I had prepared myself because cooking for someone I loved felt more meaningful than any restaurant could offer. The dishes were still in the sink, soft jazz was playing from the speakers in the living room, and the evening light was casting warm shadows across the furniture. "Marlene," he said, taking my hands in his, "I need to tell you something." My heart clenched for a moment, fearing bad news. But then I saw the small velvet box in his hand, and my fear transformed into something else entirely. I came to Birmingham thinking I would rebuild my career and nothing more. I had given up on the idea of finding someone to share my life with. But then I met you, and everything changed. He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. Nothing ostentatious, exactly the kind of ring I would have chosen for myself. "I am not a perfect man," he continued, his voice thick with what I believed was genuine emotion. "I have made mistakes, but I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend whatever years I have left on this earth trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears that I could not control. He slipped the ring onto my finger and held me close, and I felt safer and more loved than I had since Theodore's arms had last wrapped around me. I had no idea that I was embracing the man who would destroy everything I had built. The wedding was planned for 3 months later, a small ceremony at my church with only close friends and family in attendance. I did not want a large wedding, and Vincent agreed completely, another sign that he understood me in ways other people did not. His parents came back from Philadelphia for the ceremony, Barbara crying happy tears and Gerald standing proudly beside his son. "I never thought I would see this day," Barbara told me as she helped me adjust my veil before I walked down the aisle. "Vincent was always so focused on work, so closed off from love. But you changed him. You gave me back my son." I hugged her tightly, thinking how blessed I was to be gaining not just a husband, but a family. It never occurred to me that I was hugging a complete stranger, a woman who was being paid to pretend she was my mother-in-law. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Our pastor spoke about second chances at love, about the courage it takes to open your heart again after loss. Vincent's vows were eloquent and moving, speaking of gratitude and commitment and forever. I looked into his eyes as he promised to love and cherish me, and I saw nothing but sincerity. I did not know then that I was looking at the performance of a lifetime. The reception was held at a local venue, nothing too elaborate, just good food and live music and dancing. I remember Vincent spinning me around the dance floor, both of us laughing like we were young again. I remember Patricia, my best friend since college, telling me how happy she was to see me smile again after so many years of grief. I remember thinking that life was finally good again, that I had been given a gift I never expected to receive. I had no idea that the gift was actually a trap, and the jaws were already closing around me. The first year of our marriage was everything I had hoped it would be. Vincent moved into my home, a large house I had purchased several years after Theodore's death, when my business really took off. He adapted to my routines, respected my need for quiet mornings, accompanied me to social events without complaint. He showed interest in my work without being intrusive, asked about my day without prying into specifics. We established a rhythm of domesticity that felt natural and easy. I added his name to one of my bank accounts, the one I used for household expenses and personal spending. It seemed like the normal thing to do for a married couple. Vincent had his own income from what he claimed was consulting work, so I did not think twice about giving him access to shared finances. I trusted him completely. Looking back, I can see how carefully he played his role. He made small withdrawals that would not attract attention, never anything that would make me look twice at the account statements. He was patient, understanding that the long game would yield far greater rewards than any quick grab could offer. What he wanted was access to everything, and he knew that would require time to build. By the second year, Vincent began expressing interest in my business. "I just want to understand what you do," he would say with that disarming smile. I am so proud of everything you have built, and I want to be able to support you better." I was flattered by his interest. I began sharing more details about Thompson Financial Services, about our client relationships, about the internal workings of the company I had spent decades building. I showed him financial reports, introduced him to key employees, even brought him to a few client meetings as my husband. "Everyone loves him," my assistant Cheryl told me after one such meeting. "He is so charming and supportive. You are lucky to have found someone like that." I agreed completely, never suspecting that every piece of information I shared was being cataloged for later use. The changes were so gradual that I almost missed them. Vincent began suggesting we should simplify our financial life, consolidating accounts for easier management. "You work so hard," he said one evening as we sat together in the study. "Why not make things easier on yourself? I can help manage some of the personal finances so you can focus on the business." Something made me pause at this suggestion, some small instinct that I immediately suppressed. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I have always handled my own finances. It is just how I am." He backed off immediately, raising his hands in surrender. "Of course, I understand completely. I just hate seeing you stressed. Forget I mentioned it." His graceful retreat actually made me feel guilty for doubting him. That is how masterfully he played the game, making me feel bad for protecting myself. Over the following months, I gradually let my guard down further. I gave him access to more accounts, showed him where I kept important documents, even told him the combinations to the safes in my home. By the end of our second year of marriage, Vincent knew everything about my financial life. He knew the passwords, the account numbers, the locations of physical assets. He knew which properties I owned, which investments I held, which safety deposit boxes contained important papers. He had everything he needed. The first real crack in my perfect life appeared on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, going through emails in my study, when my phone rang. It was Patricia, my oldest and dearest friend. "Marlene," she said, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course," I replied, setting down the document I had been reviewing. "What is it?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I was at the Riverside Mall yesterday, in that new coffee shop on the second floor, and I saw Vincent." "Okay," I said, not understanding why this was significant. "He mentioned he had errands to run." "Marlene, he was with a woman. They were sitting very close together, talking intensely, and when they got up to leave, he put his hand on her lower back in a way that seemed intimate." My first instinct was to defend him. "Patricia, you probably misread the situation. It could have been a client or a colleague or any number of innocent explanations." "Maybe," she said, but her tone suggested she did not believe that. "I just thought you should know. I love you, and I would never forgive myself if something was happening and I did not say anything." I thanked her for her concern, assured her that everything was fine, and ended the call. But something had shifted inside me, some small seed of doubt that I could not quite ignore. That evening, when Vincent came home, I mentioned the mall casually. "Patricia said she saw you at Riverside Mall yesterday," I said, keeping my voice light. "She was at that new coffee shop." Vincent did not miss a beat. "Oh yes, I met with Linda from the Chambers Corporation. We are potentially working on a consulting project together. Did Patricia think she witnessed something scandalous?" He laughed, and his laugh was so natural, so unconcerned, that I felt foolish for even asking. No, I said quickly. "She just mentioned seeing you." "Your friends are wonderfully protective of you," he said, kissing my forehead. I find it endearing. You have people in your life who truly love you. I let the matter drop, telling myself that Patricia had indeed misread an innocent situation. But the seed of doubt remained, small but stubborn, lodged somewhere in my subconscious. Over the following weeks, I found myself noticing things I had previously overlooked. Vincent's phone seemed to be constantly face down on tables, as if he did not want me to see incoming notifications. He had started taking certain calls in other rooms, closing the door behind him with the excuse that he did not want to disturb my work. There were evenings when he came home later than expected, with explanations that were perfectly reasonable but somehow felt rehearsed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my grief over Theodore had made me distrustful, that a good marriage required faith and not suspicion. I pushed the doubts away and focused on the loving husband who still brought me flowers, still held my hand in public, still told me he loved me every single day. I chose to believe the lie because the truth was too frightening to consider. The unraveling began with a document I was never supposed to find. It was a Saturday morning, and Vincent had left early for what he said was a golf outing with potential clients. I decided to do some organizing in his study, a room he had claimed for his work and which I rarely entered out of, respect for his privacy. I was not snooping, not really. I just wanted to dust and tidy up a space that was starting to look cluttered. I was moving some books on his desk when I noticed one of the floorboards seemed slightly raised. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but something about it caught my attention. I knelt down and pressed on the board, and to my surprise, it lifted easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside the space was a thick manila folder, worn at the edges as if it had been handled many times. My heart was beating fast as I pulled it out, telling myself there was probably a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe it contained surprise vacation plans or birthday gift ideas. Maybe he was keeping romantic secrets that I would be glad to discover. I opened the folder and my entire world collapsed. Inside were documents that made no sense at first glance. There was a birth certificate for someone named Marcus Wilson, with a birth date that matched Vincent's but a completely different name. There were photographs of Vincent with people I did not recognize, in settings I had never heard him mention. There was a handwritten list of names, dates, and dollar amounts, stretching back over a decade. The names were women's names, each one followed by what appeared to be a financial summary. Beatrice from Denver, $300,000. Jennifer from Phoenix, $520,000. Maria from Houston, $475,000. The list went on and on, at least 15 names, each one representing what I now understood was another victim. Vincent, or whatever his real name was, had been doing this for years. He married wealthy women, gained their trust, drained their resources, and then moved on to the next target. I was not special to him. I was not his second chance at love. I was just the latest name on a list of conquests. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold the papers. I kept looking through the folder, hoping to find something that would contradict what I was seeing, some explanation that would make this nightmare go away. Instead, I found worse. There were fake identification documents in multiple names. There was a script, an actual written script, detailing how to approach wealthy widows and divorced women. There were notes about me specifically, observations about my habits and preferences, strategies for how to make me fall in love. Subject is guarded due to previous marriage loss, one note read in Vincent's handwriting. Approach must emphasize emotional connection over material benefits. Patience required, but payoff potentially significant. Subject. He had called me a subject. I was not a woman to him, not a person with feelings and hopes and a history. I was a target, an opportunity, a payoff. I do not know how long I sat on that floor, the folder spread open before me, my entire understanding of the past 3 years crumbling to dust. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. I remember feeling numb at first, like the information was too enormous to process all at once. Then the numbness gave way to something else, a cold, creeping horror that started in my stomach and spread outward until my entire body was shaking. I cried without making a sound, tears streaming down my face as I understood the full scope of how completely I had been deceived. Once I started looking, I could not stop. I carefully photographed every document in the folder, then returned it to its hiding place exactly as I had found it. I did not want Vincent to know what I had discovered. Not yet. I needed more information, needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made any moves. Over the following days, while maintaining a facade of normalcy with my husband, I began investigating. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sandra Morrison, who came highly recommended and who promised absolute discretion. I told her everything I had found and asked her to dig into Vincent's real identity. The results came back within a week, and they were worse than I had imagined. Vincent's real name was indeed Marcus Wilson, and he had a criminal record in 3 states. He had been convicted of fraud twice before, but had served minimal time due to plea deals in overcrowded prisons. His pattern was always the same: target wealthy women, usually widows or divorcees in their 50s and 60s, romance them carefully, marry them, and then systematically drain their assets before disappearing. But the part that hurt the most, the part that made me feel like a complete fool, was the truth about his parents. Barbara and Gerald were not his parents. They were not even related to him. They were professional actors, a married couple who had made a side business out of playing roles in various scams and confidence games. They had been doing this for over 20 years, providing believable family backgrounds for con artists who needed to appear legitimate. Vincent paid them a flat fee for each performance, plus a percentage of whatever he eventually stole from his targets. Our wedding had been a business transaction for them, nothing more. The woman who had helped me with my veil, who had called me daughter, who had cried what I thought were tears of joy at seeing her son marry, had been performing a role she had probably performed dozens of times before. The man who had spoken about integrity and values, who had shaken my hand and welcomed me to the family, was just as much a fraud as the man I had married. Every tender moment, every piece of family history, every photograph on that phone, all of it had been constructed specifically to deceive me. I had embraced strangers as family. I had trusted them with my emotions. I had been manipulated so completely that I had not suspected a single thing. The days following these discoveries were among the darkest of my life. I had to continue living with Vincent, sleeping beside him, eating meals across from him, all while knowing that everything about him was a lie. I became an actress myself, pretending that nothing had changed, while secretly preparing for what needed to happen next. There were moments when I wanted to confront him immediately, to scream at him, to demand explanations. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think strategically, to gather evidence that would be useful when the time came. I began secretly documenting everything. I took photographs of financial statements, copied emails, recorded conversations when I could do so legally. I tracked the money that had been moving out of our shared accounts, small amounts that had added up to over $50,000 over the course of our marriage. But I knew that the small amounts were just the beginning. Vincent's real goal was much larger. He was positioning himself to take everything. I found evidence that he had been consulting with lawyers about community property laws. He had been researching ways to claim half of my business in a divorce. He had even been making inquiries about challenging the validity of my prenuptial agreement with Theodore, the one that had protected my premarital assets. His plan was clear. He would stay married to me long enough to establish claims to my wealth, then engineer a divorce that would leave him with a substantial portion of everything I had built. Or worse, and this thought kept me awake at night, he might have other plans entirely. Some of the women on his list had disappeared. The private investigator could not find current information on several of them. Did that mean they had simply moved on with their lives? Or did it mean something more sinister? I did not know, and the not knowing was terrifying. I knew I could not handle this alone. My first call was to Patricia, the friend who had first noticed something was wrong. I told her everything, showed her the evidence I had gathered, and watched her face transform from shock to anger to fierce determination. "We are going to destroy him," she said, her voice steady despite the fury in her eyes. "He picked the wrong woman to mess with." Her loyalty and anger were like oxygen to my suffocating spirit. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt like I might actually survive this. My next step was to hire an attorney, someone who specialized in fraud cases and who could guide me through what needed to happen legally. I met with a woman named Candace Henderson, a partner at one of the most respected law firms in the city. "Mrs. Thompson," she said after reviewing my evidence, "you have a strong case here, but we need to move carefully. If he suspects you know the truth, he might disappear with whatever he can take, and we will never see justice." Together, we developed a strategy. We would work with law enforcement to build a case that would not only protect my assets, but also put Vincent away for a very long time. We would coordinate with prosecutors in other states where his previous victims might still be seeking justice. We would make sure he never did this to anyone else. The hardest part was going to the police. I met with a detective named Robert Morrison, no relation to my private investigator, who specialized in financial crimes. "Ma'am," he said after I had told him everything, "I want you to know that what you are doing is incredibly brave. Many victims in your situation are too embarrassed to come forward. They suffer in silence, blame themselves, and let the perpetrator move on to hurt others." "I do feel embarrassed," I admitted. "I cannot believe I fell for it so completely." Detective Morrison shook his head firmly. "These men are professionals. They study human psychology. They know exactly how to exploit our deepest needs for connection and love. You are not a fool for trusting someone who is specifically trained to earn your trust." His words helped, but the shame did not disappear entirely. I suspect it never will. For the next 6 weeks, I continued living my double life. By day, I was the unsuspecting wife who still cooked dinners and made small talk, and pretended to believe every lie that came out of my husband's mouth. By night, after he was asleep, I gathered evidence and communicated with my legal team through encrypted channels. The strain was enormous. I lost weight. I could not sleep properly. I developed a nervous habit of checking doors and windows, as if physical security could protect me from the emotional devastation I was experiencing. Patricia became my lifeline during this period. She checked on me daily, sometimes meeting me for coffee in public places where Vincent would not think to look. "You are doing the right thing," she would remind me when my resolve wavered. "Every day you stay strong is another day closer to being free of him." "But what if he realizes something is wrong?" I would ask. "What if he runs before we are ready?" "Then we will chase him to the ends of the earth," Patricia replied. "But I do not think that is going to happen. His arrogance is his weakness. He truly believes he has you completely fooled." She was right. Vincent showed no signs of suspicion. He continued his routines, continued his little schemes, continued treating me with the counterfeit affection that I now recognized for what it was. He even brought up the idea of us taking a trip to Europe, a romantic getaway to celebrate our 3rd anniversary. "You work too hard," he said one evening, massaging my shoulders in a gesture that now felt like violation. "We should take some time just for us. Paris in the spring is supposed to be beautiful." I smiled and said that sounded lovely, all while knowing that by spring, he would likely be in a prison cell rather than on the Champs-Élysées. The investigation moved faster than I had expected. Detective Morrison connected with law enforcement in other states, and it turned out that several of Vincent's previous victims were still seeking justice. 2 women in Texas had been trying for years to locate him. A woman in California had actually started a support group for his victims, not knowing if she would ever see her money again. The more I learned about his other victims, the more I understood that I was not unique. Each woman had been targeted specifically because she fit a certain profile. She was wealthy, usually through her own hard work rather than inheritance. She was emotionally vulnerable, either from grief or loneliness or divorce. She was private, the kind of person who would be too embarrassed to make a public fuss when she discovered the truth. Vincent had been hunting women like me for decades. He knew exactly what kind of prey was easiest to catch. I spoke with some of these women, phone calls arranged through the detective that allowed us to share our experiences. Beatrice from Denver was a retired surgeon who had lost over $300,000. "I still cannot believe I fell for it," she told me, her voice thick with lingering shame. "I spent my entire career diagnosing problems, and I could not see the problem right in front of me." Jennifer from Phoenix was a former executive who had been widowed young. "The fake parents got me," she admitted. "I had no family of my own, and when he introduced me to what seemed like loving, supportive parents, I was sold completely." Each story was different in its details, but identical in its emotional core. Vincent had exploited our loneliness, our desire for connection, our willingness to trust someone who seemed good. And now, together, we were going to make sure he never did it again. The final plan came together in early March, just weeks before our 3rd wedding anniversary. Law enforcement had coordinated with multiple jurisdictions. Warrants were ready. Evidence had been compiled and reviewed by prosecutors who were confident they could secure convictions. All that remained was to set the trap. I was asked to create a situation where Vincent would be at a specific location at a specific time. It had to seem natural, something that would not raise his suspicions. The opportunity came when I told him I had a surprise for our anniversary. "I have been planning something special," I said over breakfast one morning, injecting excitement into my voice that I did not feel. "I want us to renew our vows, just the 2 of us, at that little chapel where we were married." Vincent's face lit up with what he probably thought was joy, but was actually greed, calculating how to use this opportunity. "That is a beautiful idea," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You are such a romantic. That is one of the things I love most about you." I smiled back at him, thinking about how his expressions of love would soon give way to expressions of shock. The date was set for the following Saturday. I even called Barbara and Gerald, the fake parents, to invite them to the ceremony. "Oh, how wonderful," Barbara gushed on the phone. "Gerald and I would not miss it for the world." I wondered if she knew what was coming. Probably not. Criminals like her operated on a need-to-know basis, keeping themselves deliberately ignorant of the larger picture so they could claim innocence if things went wrong. But this time, there would be no claiming innocence for anyone. The morning of what was supposed to be our vow renewal ceremony was cold and bright, the kind of day that seems to promise good things. I dressed carefully, choosing a cream-colored dress that I had bought specifically for this occasion. It was not white, because I was not innocent, and it was not black, because this was not a funeral. It was something in between, a color that felt appropriate for the strange mixture of grief and relief I was experiencing. Vincent drove us to the church, chatting happily about our future together. "After this, we should seriously talk about that trip to Europe," he said. "Maybe extend it to a full month. We deserve to enjoy ourselves." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, watching the familiar streets pass by outside my window. I knew that unmarked police cars were positioned along our route. I knew that officers were already at the church, waiting for our arrival. I knew that in less than an hour, this charade would finally be over. We arrived at the church just before noon. The building was exactly as I remembered from our wedding. A beautiful old structure with stained glass windows and wooden pews that had been polished by generations of worship. But today, it was not a place of celebration. Today, it was the stage for the final act of a very different kind of drama. Barbara and Gerald were already there, waiting in the vestibule with smiles that seemed slightly nervous. Maybe they sensed something was wrong, or maybe they were just uncomfortable being in a church while planning to participate in yet another deception. "You look beautiful, dear," Barbara said, embracing me in that maternal way that had once felt so genuine. "Thank you," I replied, looking into her eyes and seeing for the first time the emptiness behind them. She was performing again, and now that I knew the truth, I could see the performance for what it was. We walked into the main sanctuary, where a few chairs had been set up near the altar. The pastor who had married us was there, looking slightly uncomfortable. He had been informed about what was going to happen and had agreed to participate, believing that justice was a form of ministry. Vincent and I stood facing each other, holding hands. He looked at me with those eyes that had once made me feel so loved. Now I could see them for what they really were: tools of manipulation, weapons wielded by a predator. "Marlene," the pastor began, "we are gathered here today to—" He never finished the sentence. The doors at the back of the church opened, and Detective Morrison walked in, followed by 4 uniformed officers. Vincent's face transformed in an instant. The mask of loving husband slipped away, replaced first by confusion and then by something darker. He tried to pull away from me, but I held his hands firmly. "Do not bother running," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "They are outside too." "Marlene, what is this?" he demanded, his voice losing all its carefully cultivated warmth. "What have you done?" "I found your folder," I said simply. "I know everything. I know who you really are. I know about Beatrice and Jennifer and Maria and all the others. I know about your fake parents. I know it was all a lie." I watched the realization dawn on his face, watched him understand that his careful construction had crumbled completely. For a moment, he seemed like he might try to explain, to spin some new story that would make everything okay. But then his shoulders slumped, and the performance was finally over. "Marcus Wilson," Detective Morrison said, approaching with handcuffs ready. "You are under arrest for fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." I watched as they cuffed him, as they read him his rights, as they led him toward the door. He looked back at me once, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something human in his eyes. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was simply frustration at being caught. I will never know, and I have decided that I do not need to know. Barbara and Gerald were arrested too, their faces shifting from confusion to fear to resignation, as they realized that their long career of deception had finally come to an end. "We did not know the full extent," Barbara tried to claim. "We were just playing a role." I had no sympathy for her. She had helped destroy lives. She deserved whatever consequences came her way. The weeks following the arrest were a blur of legal proceedings, interviews with prosecutors, and emotional recovery. Vincent, or Marcus, as I now thought of him, was denied bail due to flight risk. Prosecutors from multiple states were coordinating to ensure he would face the maximum possible consequences. Barbara and Gerald cooperated with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences, providing information about other scams they had participated in over the years. It turned out their criminal enterprise was even larger than anyone had suspected, involving not just fake family schemes, but also various other forms of fraud. For me, the emotional recovery was harder than the legal process. I spent long nights questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. How could I have been so blind? How could someone who prided herself on intelligence and judgment have fallen so completely for such obvious manipulation? My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, helped me understand that being victimized was not a character flaw. These criminals are experts at what they do, she explained. They study human psychology. They exploit our most fundamental needs for love and connection. Being deceived by a professional deceiver does not make you foolish. It makes you human. Slowly, I began to accept that truth. I began to forgive myself for believing the lie. I began to direct my anger where it belonged, not at myself for trusting, but at Marcus for exploiting that trust. I also connected more deeply with his other victims. We formed an informal support group, women from across the country who had all been targeted by the same predator. We talked about our experiences, shared our grief and shame, and slowly helped each other heal. You know what the worst part is? Beatrice said during one of our calls. I actually missed the person I thought he was. Even knowing it was all fake, part of me still misses the illusion. I understood exactly what she meant. The man I had fallen in love with never existed, but that did not make the love I had felt any less real. I was grieving a phantom, mourning something that had never truly been born, but had felt so alive while I believed in it. The trial came 6 months after the arrest, a multi-week affair that drew media attention from across the country. I testified on the third day, walking into a courtroom filled with reporters and spectators and taking my seat in the witness stand. Marcus sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had taken something from him, some of that polished charm that had made him so effective as a predator. He looked at me once, and I held his gaze without flinching. He had no power over me anymore. I told the court everything. I described our meeting, our courtship, our marriage. I explained how he had gradually gained access to my finances. I told them about finding the folder, about the list of names, about the horrible moment of realization. The hardest part was describing the fake parents, the woman who had called me daughter, and the man who had spoken of integrity. I cried as I talked about embracing them at my wedding, believing I was gaining a family. I could see some of the jurors wiping their own eyes. Other victims testified as well, women I had come to know through our support group. Beatrice talked about losing her retirement savings and having to return to work at 70 years old. Jennifer described the depression that had nearly killed her after discovering the truth about her marriage. Maria spoke through an interpreter, her limited English not hiding the pain in her voice, as she recounted how Marcus had left her with nothing but debt. Each story was different in its specifics, but identical in its emotional devastation. By the time the prosecution rested, the jury had a comprehensive picture of a man who had built his entire life around exploiting vulnerable women. The defense tried to argue that Marcus was simply a businessman who had engaged in questionable but not criminal behavior. It was a pathetic argument that fooled no one. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Marcus. "You have spent your life preying on people who trusted you," she said, voice cold with controlled fury. "You exploited love, the most sacred of human emotions, for personal gain. You destroyed not just bank accounts, but spirits. You took from these women not just money, but their ability to trust, their belief in human goodness, their hope for connection. I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison, to be followed by restitution orders that will garnish whatever you ever earn for the rest of your life." Marcus showed no emotion as the sentence was read. Perhaps he had none left to show. Perhaps he never had any to begin with. Recovery from trauma is not a straight line. There are good days and bad days, moments of strength and moments of crushing doubt. But slowly, surely, I began to rebuild my life. I sold the house where Vincent and I had lived, unable to bear the memories that haunted every room. I bought a smaller place, a cottage outside the city where I could see trees and sky and feel like I was starting fresh. I continued running Thompson Financial Services, though I stepped back from some of the day-to-day responsibilities. I promoted people I trusted, delegated tasks that had once consumed all my attention, and gave myself permission to slow down. I also became more involved in advocacy work. I spoke at conferences about fraud prevention, sharing my story so that others might recognize the warning signs I had missed. I helped establish formal support groups for fraud victims, providing resources and community for people who felt too ashamed to seek help. If my suffering could prevent even one other person from experiencing what I had experienced, then some meaning could be salvaged from the wreckage. Patricia remained my closest friend and supporter throughout this process. "You know what I admire most about you?" she said one afternoon as we sat on my cottage porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What?" I asked. "You did not let this make you bitter," she said. "You could have closed yourself off, decided never to trust anyone again. But instead, you are out there helping other people, opening your heart even after it was broken so badly." I thought about her words for a long time after she left. She was right that I had not become bitter, but it was not because I was especially strong or noble. It was because I had learned that bitterness was just another way of letting the perpetrator win. Marcus had stolen money from me, stolen years of my life, stolen my sense of security and trust. But he would not steal my capacity for love. He would not steal my belief in human goodness. Those things were mine, and I refused to surrender them. People sometimes ask me if I regret trusting Vincent, if I wish I had been more suspicious, more guarded. The answer is complicated. Of course I wish I had not been deceived. Of course I wish I had seen through his performance before it cost me so much. But I do not regret being the kind of person who is capable of trust. Here is what I have come to understand. The ability to trust is not a weakness, even when that trust is betrayed. It is actually a profound strength, a willingness to be vulnerable in the pursuit of connection. Marcus exploited that strength, yes, but the flaw was in him, not in me. He went through life unable to form genuine connections, using people as tools rather than relating to them as human beings. In the end, despite all the money he stole, he was the impoverished one. He lived in a prison of manipulation and performance long before he ever saw the inside of an actual cell. I, on the other hand, have real relationships. I have friends who love me not for what I can give them, but for who I am. I have family, both biological and chosen, who stand by me in times of trouble. I have a community that has supported me through the worst experience of my life. Those connections are worth more than any amount of money. They are the real treasure, the kind that no con artist can ever steal. For those who might be watching this and wondering if they too might be targets of a romance scam, let me share some of what I have learned. First, be wary of anyone who seems too perfect. Real people have flaws, rough edges, moments of awkwardness. Someone who always says exactly the right thing, who always knows exactly how to make you feel special, might be performing rather than relating. Second, Pay attention to inconsistencies in their stories. Con artists have to remember a lot of lies, and sometimes the details do not quite add up. If something they tell you contradicts something they said before, do not dismiss your confusion. Investigate it. Third, be cautious about introducing money into the relationship too quickly. A genuine partner will understand if you want to keep finances separate at first. Someone who pressures you to share accounts or make them beneficiaries early in the relationship is showing a red flag. Fourth, do not isolate yourself from friends and family who express concerns. Patricia's observation about Vincent at the mall was the first crack in my illusion. People who love you can sometimes see what you cannot see. Listen to them, even when it is uncomfortable. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, remember that you are never too smart, too successful, or too experienced to be victimized. These criminals are professionals. They have spent years honing their craft. There is no shame in being deceived by someone whose entire life is dedicated to deception. The shame belongs to them, not to you. Today, nearly 5 years after that morning when I discovered the folder beneath the floorboards, my life looks very different. I am at peace, or at least as much at peace as anyone can be after what I experienced. I wake up each morning in my little cottage, make coffee, and watch the birds outside my kitchen window. I have learned to find joy in simple things: the smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain on the roof, the company of good friends. I still run Thompson Financial Services, though I spend less time in the office than I used to. I have learned that work, no matter how important, is not the whole of life. I continue my advocacy work, speaking publicly about romance scams and supporting other victims. This work gives me purpose and helps transform my pain into something positive. I have not married again, and I am not sure if I ever will. Not because I am afraid of love or incapable of trust, but because I have learned that I am complete on my own, that I do not need another person to validate my existence or fill some gap in my soul. If love comes again, I will welcome it. But I am not searching for it. I am content with the life I have built. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story touched you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, or share your own experience if you feel comfortable. This channel is about real stories, real struggles, real survival. We're building something here. A space where truth matters more than perfection. Like this video, subscribe for more stories like this, and know that you're not alone. Whatever you're going through, someone else has walked that path. We're all doing the best we can. Be gentle with yourself. Take care, sweetheart. I'll see you in the next one.